Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is U.S. Immigration Attorney Hardam Tripathi from Trip Law. Today I'm going to be speaking with you about qualified investments as it relates to E2 petitions. This is going to be a very difficult topic for a lot of people, I think, just because it is very interesting how it is involved with numbers. A lot of us, even as lawyers, we became lawyers because we didn't like numbers, but lo and behold, we're in business. Numbers are very important. So I actually am very interested in giving this conversation today because there are some examples I'm going to give regarding E2 qualified investments as it relates to foreign investors and what it means for E2 investments. So let's kind of jump right in. Let's kind of talk about what is a qualified investment. So ultimately what a qualified investment is, and this is called the FAM, the FAM, right? The FAM, it's called the Foreign Affairs Manual. This is a manual that the U.S. State Department uses if you are a e-visa officer. So if you're actually the one processing E2 visas and you're actually at the State Department doing that interview, this is what these e-visa officers are going to use. This is why it's very important to get a lawyer. This is why we're going to tell you in this nugget. This is probably one of the most important videos you're probably going to see in this whole series of E2s because it will kind of break down the qualified investment. This makes or breaks people. And if you don't have a qualified attorney who knows what they're doing when it involves these E2 qualified investments, it's going to be a little bit of an issue. So we want to make sure that you understand this if you're listening in. Please do give us a call if you have any questions after this video. This can be a little complicated, but give us a call. Our number is 863-370-2427. Once again, that's 863-370-2427. Or our email is info@trip-law.com. That's info@trip-law.com. So ultimately, the Foreign Affairs Manual dictates and it instructs, right, E2 visa officers ultimately the following language. I'm going to actually read this language because I want my listeners here today to ultimately understand what are they looking for. You know, if you understand what these officers are looking for, you'll be better off, you know, on the back end as well and the front end, ultimately knowing how can we best prepare for that interview. So ultimately, here's what they say. It says this. This is the language. I'm going to read it because I think it's very important that you get every single word. And if you have any questions, do give us a call. We'll walk you through it. But the language is this. It says you must assess, right? You must assess, right, the nature of the investment transaction to determine whether a particular financial arrangement may be considered an investment within the meaning of INA 101A 15E subsection 2. That last part, that's all legalese. But if you look at kind of the first part of it, there's certain words there that I would be concerned if I was not a lawyer and I was someone who was just trying to get a lawyer and trying to basically figure this out. And I'm an immigrant. I went through this to all those listening in. But, you know, words like financial arrangement, words such as investment transaction, what does that mean, right? And so here's what we do as lawyers. What we do is we work with you in your case. We look at everything. We know what, you know, I've worked for the State Department before as an attorney. I'm telling you this. I've worked at the State Department. I see how they do what they do. And so what's very important is you as that potential client or you as that potential investor, you need to make sure you dot all your I's, cross all your T's. Make sure you know exactly what these terms of art mean. And I think that's the biggest thing. And we read the FAM. We read the Foreign Affairs Manual. We understand what this textbook example is all about. And so we'll kind of dive into that today. And that's what this video is really about. Ultimately, usually most kind of E2s follow a certain transaction, right? They follow a certain level of dichotomy, right? You usually have an investment side where the E2 investment is actually made. It involves the actual E2 investor transferring their money, their E2 investment, from their personal funds, right? From their personal foreign bank account in that home country to the new U.S. Enterprises bank account. And that's where you have to get the ITIN number. You know, the IRS is involved. There's a lot of different Department of Treasury. You have a lot of different departments you have to work with. So it's basically the transfer of funds from your personal bank account in that home country that's an E2 country to the actual U.S. commercial enterprise bank account. And once you do that, that's called the investment, right? So that's going to be very narrowly tailored, right? It's going to be looked at. It's going to be examined. All these things are very important. So ultimately, the language in the Foreign Affairs Manual is very unique in this. It allows that the officer, right, the person, that man or woman who's going to be determining your case, right, even though you spent thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars investing your money in these great United States, that officer has a lot of discretion. That's why we need a lawyer. That's why we need to make sure that Trip Law protects you. That's why we need you to know what you're walking into, right? And ultimately what's going to happen is the language, right? This is what I'm going to read to you. The language says that the officer has to determine whether other arrangements may be considered an investment. So this can be either your crutch or it could be your benefit. And that's what we do here at Trip Law. We want to make sure that you, as that potential investor or that potential client here at Trip Law, working with Attorney Tripathi like myself, along with our other attorneys, we just want to make sure we look at your investment, all right? And that's very important. That's a key component of it. On top of that, you got to make sure that you're understanding who your partners are. A lot of this is very nuanced, right? You're going to have partners from those home countries. You're going to have partners in the United States. All that does affect that initial substantial investment for qualified investment purposes as it relates to E2 petitions. So very important stuff we're talking about right now. It's very dangerous. You're on a slippery slope if you don't do this right. So just wanted to put this out there for y'all. Just let you know, like, give us a call. We'll help you with this. But don't be caught, like with your tail between your legs later on the back end, because the law or the Foreign Affairs Manual did not make sense. So it's very important we do this right on the front end. There's zero excuse for failure, especially when you're a sophisticated investor like yourself who's listening in. You're very smart. You know what's going on. But sometimes you do need someone who's going to have a second set of eyes, and that's what we do. So I'm going to give you a very brief example before we end this video today, just to kind of highlight the importance of qualified investments for E2 petitions. So ultimately, here's what's going on, right? If you don't plan on taking this E2 commercial enterprise that you have, right, and you don't want to do it with your own capital, and that's okay. You don't have to bring your own money into it all the time either. Substantial investments range from about $100,000 to, up, right? It could be whatever amount based on the type of business. $100,000 usually on average. But what if you don't want to use your capital? What if you want to use capital from another enterprise or from another, equity partner or a bank or whatever it may be? Well, in that case, you're going to have to make sure you do take into account the nationality of that individual. This is very important. This is probably the most important part of the video, and I saved the best for last because this is so important, and we have had clients who have struggled with this, and we want to make sure you do not become that person who has to go through that. The U.S. government always looks at nationality because remember, this is a treaty-based program. The treaty dictates, so you need to be a majority owner. That is the law. You have to be a majority owner as the applicant. If the equity partner happens to end up becoming the majority owner, then you lose, right? You don't get that E2 visa. Also, on the other side of it, the flip side of it, if your partner comes from a different nationality and you lose interest in the business from an equity standpoint, you also lose, right? So I'm going to give you an example of what that really means because this is very important. This is the most important part of this video, and please take notes. Please give us a call at 863-370-2427 because this is so important. Basically what happens is this. I'm looking at an example of one of my own cases that I had. I'm looking at it, and for attorney-client privileges and things like that, I'm not going to use names or anything like that, but I'll give you an example, right? We had a co-founder who was American, okay? And then we had another co-founder who was Indian. And this Indian person, obviously E2 country, India is not an E2 country. So we obviously had a wrinkle in that. We had to take that client and, they went through a different country. Antigua is what we've always recommended. And then through that, they became Antiguan. And they were able to invest and ultimately end up doing the best job that they could to ultimately apply as a co-founder as well as an Antiguan co-founder with an American co-founder. Ultimately, what happened was we had the American own about 50% of the company, and then and the Antiguan owned 50% of the company. So you have 50 and 50, that's 100%. And what ends up happening is they put $30,000, okay, in their own personal wealth as a capital contribution. So think about this. They each put in $30,000. So 30 and 30 was $60,000. Both my client, the immigrant gentleman, put in the $30,000 from Antigua. And then we had the other gentleman who's American who put in 30. At this point, they had to raise more capital. That was $60,000. It was not a substantial investment. But what we were able to see was that we also had an angel investor, okay? And this angel investor had ultimately the capital. They had the money, right? So I'm looking at the numbers here, and my client was able to exchange 5% of their equity. So it was like 10% in total with the angel investor. So 5% from the American, 5% from the Antiguan. We had 10% total. And then we had an angel investor who put in $100,000, okay? But it just so happened that angel investor was also Antiguan, also made a lot of money, and was very wealthy in that island nation, and they were able to put in $100,000. So when that happened, now 55% of that company is Antiguan, okay? And so if the angel investor is Antiguan, that's good. But what if you had gotten that money from an American? Well, that means now that, 45% of your company is now Antiguan, and now you no longer qualify as an Antiguan company for E2 visa purposes because the American company is the majority shareholder. So we'll do all the math. We'll do the numbers for you when you come into our office. If you need other funding, we have EB3 investors. We have investors from all over. But we can do that. But if this is going to happen, that's when you need really a lawyer, right? Because what we will do is we will make sure that you transition to another visa type, right? As this whole exchange of equity is happening, because you can't have that equity jeopardize all the money and time that you spent into this E2 application, because what's going to happen is the government is going to realize that this is not going to be a valid option for you, especially if the company loses their treaty nationality. So ultimately, you have to make sure that you maintain the treaty nationality. And there's a whole other video on that as well. But long story short, just wanted to make sure you kind of had an idea of the importance of qualified investments for E2 petitions, because at the end of all of it, you got to make sure that you come from that actually treaty country, that the amount of investments are in a way that's not going to overcome the American investments. This whole program is built on ultimately bringing in those foreign investors based on the Foreign Affairs Manual, and ultimately bringing a lot of stimulus to the U.S. economy. So we talked about a lot today. Today we talked about the FAM. We talked about what instructions e-visa officers have to follow when they're actually judging you on your e-visa application. We also talked about kind of like a textbook example of what actually goes on in an E2 visa kind of process with source of funds. Usually that's taking money from your personal account, bringing it over to your business account, your commercial enterprise account. That's what we talked about. And then we also talked about what happens if you're an E2 investor and you're trying to use your own capital versus if you need more capital from another investor, an angel investor, then what happens in that regard. So we talked about 3 different things within the E2 program as it relates to qualified investments for E2 petitions. So hopefully you found this nugget of gold very important. We even brought a very crude example of kind of what my clients have gone through and how we've been able to overcome and win. And so these are things that are very important that I think that you as that potential investor needs to know. And if you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call. Don't put yourself in a position that's going to harm your opportunity here in the U.S. Because at the end of the day, not only do you harm yourself, you harm your spouse, you harm your unmarried child under the age of 21. This is very serious business, and we want to make sure you have the best attorneys in town to help you with that. We'd be more than happy to help you here at Trip Law. So if you have any questions, like I said, give us a call, 863-370-2427. We hope you found this nugget of gold, very informative. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to give us a call. And we look forward to servicing you. This is U.S. Immigration Attorney Hardam Tripathi from Trip Law, and we do thank you for your time, and we wish you the best of luck with your E2 immigration journey. Thank you.